Do you walk into a fabric store and your heart starts racing, pounding really hard? Do you get overwhelmed? And so you just leave with nothing. Nothing to begin your first quilting project. You don't know where to begin. I mean, look at all of this stuff. You don't know which ones of these that you need for what project, for what part of the quilt. You don't know how to piece the two fabrics together to make it a cohesive quilt. Well, this series will lead you into the right direction. Welcome, my quilting friends. I am Jackie with Jackie Russell Creates, where we create quilts, mug rugs, wall hangings, and so much more. Over the course, we will talk about everything that you need to get started terminology wise and to quilt your first quilt. First, we're going to begin with the different supplies that you will need. As you look at my table, there is a wide range of supplies. Do you need all of this to get started? No. So let me clean up my space real fast and I'll walk you through each little piece so you don't get too overwhelmed. Throughout the series, the different videos I'll be posting later on, I will go in depth in each category. This is just a general overview to get you started when you go into that fabric store to pick the right supplies that you need to start your first quilt. So first we're going to talk about fabric. Fabric comes in an array of cuts. When you're in your store, you're probably going, what cut do I need to buy? So first, let me break it down for you. So first of all, your fabric will come in yardage. This is probably what you're most commonly seeing. It's wrapped around a bolt, which is a cardboard. And you can buy however much you need. You can buy a 1/4 inch, a yard. I use a lot of white, so we normally buy several yards at a time. And then of course the amount depends on your pattern. You can also get yardage pre-cut for you. This is just a 1-cut fabric, but you can also get it in 4 yards and 2 yards already pre-cut. You just have to, which is a great way, you know, not to have to stand at the quilting table, but not all fabrics come this way. So the next, it will be panels. It comes on a bolt just like the other ones I showed, but it's a panel. It's a design and you buy per panel. So this is a firefighter panel. It can be broke up into different things. Each panel is different, but you buy per panel and the price varies per the size of the panel. So if you see a panel you like, you know that's something that you can purchase and be able to make a quilt out of. I make wall hangings, and that will be a project that will be later on the channel. The next is fat quarters. So fat quarters is 18 inches by 22 inches. And you can buy them rolled up like this. You can buy them so they're folded on a cardboard like this. Or you can also get in a bundle which has several fat quarters together that coordinate well together, so that you don't have to pick and decide on what fabrics match. You can just go with the coordinating bundle. This one has, I think, like 5 or 6 different fabrics in them. So this is what it looks like when you open it up. And then you can also get a fat 1/8. Now a fat 1/8 is just taking a fat quarter and cutting it in half. It is 9 inches by 22 inches. I don't use these fat 1/8. I just go ahead and get the fat quarter. But you know, it's an option out there if you don't need very much fabric for your quilt or, you know, wall hanging, or if you're making mug rugs or something like that, then, you know, a fat 1/8 would be perfect for that. Then we get into some pre-cut. We have jelly rolls, and jelly rolls are 2.5 inches wide by the width of the fabric. Width of fabric means how long, or how wide the fabric is. Generally, it is 42 to 44 inches, and it comes in a roll. This is a small jelly roll. You can get ones that are like twice as big. This has 20 strips in it. You can get them that have 40 strips. Then you also want to look and make sure like how many designs is in there and how many of each. This one has 5 designs with 4 of each design. I've gotten some which have had 10 designs and I got 2 of each. So that is something you want to look at, and it will tell you on the tag. Now we're going to get into some more pre-cuts, but these are squares. So the first one is called a mini charm. It is 2.5 by 2.5 square. A lot of people just collect these and have them sitting around, or if they're not for sure what the fabric, they want to buy a whole bunch of the fabric. So this, you know, gives you a sample of each of the fabrics. I'm going to make a couple blocks using a mini charm. Then we have the charm pack, which is a 5 inches by 5 inches, so you can see here, compare the difference. It's the same way as the mini charms. It comes in a package. You can get a variety of fabrics in them. Normally there's 42 pieces in a charm pack, but this is like, you know, all the fabric that coordinating with this. There are a bunch of different quilt patterns that use charm packs. And then we come to the layered cake, and it is 10 inches by 10 inches, and it comes in a pack, and it has a variety of fabrics. Once again, all these fabrics coordinate together. This is all from a full line. Here you can see the difference between the 3. This is great to be able to do like almost any size quilt with, except for sashing and bordering. You know, you can be able to cut pieces from this. You can be able to use the full square and make big blocks. So a great item to have. Okay, the next item that you'll need is a self-healing mat. As you can see on my table, I have a big one that is 36 inches by 24 inches. I like mine to be this big because I sew fabric, I sew outfits. So I like to have my cutting mat a little bigger, and it also works great when you're trying to cut longer strips of fabric. And so I like to have the big one, but I also have, you know, the smaller one, which it is a 24 by 18. So this is a perfect size for a fat quarter to lay on. You'll just have a little hangover, but once you square it up, you'll have no problem with that. You can also get smaller ones to be able to cut, you know, if you're just working with, say, the mini charm. This is just the perfect size that you would need for it. I would recommend at least a big one like this and then a small one. I use Friskers, but you know, there's a whole range of different ones out there. You know, find the ones that's in your, you know, currently in your price range. Now we need cutting devices. So the one what I recommend is you have a rotary cutter. There are 2 different styles that I have. I have the one that I can put my hand in, and then this one's just hold in. There's pros and cons about both. I like to be able to hold them and see which one fits better. So that is, you know, one I suggest. I also recommend having additional blades on hand. I have 2 rotary cutters. I have a straight blade, and then I also have a pinking blade. The pinking blade is something I just recently got. It's not nothing you need to go out and buy right away, but they're great to have. But the straight edge rotary blade is perfect. Then you need some fabric scissors, and I say fabric because you want to get some very sharp scissors, and you want to make sure They're not used for anything else, only cutting fabric, because if you cut paper and stuff, it will dull your scissors. Make sure your family members, everybody else knows, don't touch the fabric scissors. My fabric scissors are the orange handled, so if they grab the orange handle, they know they're in trouble if they cut something besides fabric with them. I have tons of other scissors around. They know better than touch my fabric scissors. And then I have just some little scissors. I call them snippets. They got a very fine point on them, so it's great for just snipping a little thread between your start and finish thread, so it's nice and clean. You would also need a seam ripper, and I know that sounds crazy, you're a quilter, but I have a love-hate relationship with my seam ripper, and you can get a variety of them at the store, different lengths, different handles. But when you get a sewing machine, most of the time you'll have one that comes with your sewing machine, unless your machine is a hand-me-down, but you should have a seam ripper. We're going to need pins to be able to hold our fabric pieces together, and there's a couple different type of pins. Find what works for you. So for me, I like the long pins. I have ones that have just the yellow balls on the top, and then I have some that have little flowers, and I like the flat flower part, so when you're ironing, you can just put another piece of fabric or something over that and continue to iron, versus the ball that would, you know, kind of melt. Then you're gonna need some basting pins, and so the basting pins are what hold your 3 layers of your together. You have your quilt top, your batting, and your back, and so that basting pins is what holds them together while you're quilting. So they just look like little safety pins, but they actually do have a little notch cut into them, or not cut into them, a little bend, so it makes it easier when you're pinning your fabrics together. And one other thing, it's optional, but I found it's so much easier when it comes to putting on the binding, and they're called Wonder Clips. They're just a little plastic clip with a spring, and it just holds all 3 of the fabrics and the binding real nice together, versus trying to get a pin through your little binding. So I like these. I found these on Amazon for very inexpensive. I think it was like $8 for this whole tin. And there's over 100 in here. So I really do recommend getting Wonder Clips to be able to hold your binding on. It makes it so much easier. You'll be less frustrated in the end. So now we need something to cut a straight line with when we cut our fabric. You can't just lay your fabric on your self-healing mat and, you know, just cut. So there's a variety of different rulers out there. You probably have seen them and you're going, oh my gosh, which one do I buy? I recommend a long straight edge one. This is a kind of a dual one. This is a binding buddy. So it's 2.5 inches wide, 30 inches long. So it's great to cut the whole length. It's also used to make your binding. Like my binding, I always cut at 2.5 inches. So I know the whole width of this ruler is my binding. So I can cut up it, move it over, and continue to keep cutting along the edge. You can also get some other ones that are wider, but I do recommend at least a 2.5 inch that's very long. Then I recommend a square one. Now I have a variety of squares. Any size of the squares will work. They just make it really nice when you're squaring up your blocks. So like I have a 3-inch one, I have a 6-inch one, and this is a 12-inch. Go with a 6-inch. 12-inch makes it so you can do most of your size block. But like I said, when you're working with the smaller blocks, sometimes it's nice to have a smaller ruler. There's a variety of them out there. I use several different brands. And another one that I'm recommending, but it's not required to start quilting, is a 1/2 square and a 1/4 square triangle. This makes cutting your triangles, your 1/2 square triangles, so easy. You have the middle line where you have to sew between, so that's great for, you know, to be able to mark. Over here's where you can cut them apart, and then here's where you square them up, and it's just a really nice template to have. So now we need something to sew with. So we have thread. Thread comes in a variety of colors. You can get metallic clear, so it's invisible. All of them will work and have their purposes, but when you're actually quilting your pieces together, there's only one type that you really need. I use, as you can see, a variety of thread, but to sew your quilt tops or blocks together, I use, it's on my machine, I use 50 weight 100% cotton, and I use white. You can also use polyester, and you can use any color, but when you're quilting your pieces together, I stay with white. It's less inexpensive versus the color one. The color ones aren't going to be seen when you're piecing your blocks together. I use these for quilting on the tops of them. So you can get polyester, metallic. Here is some silky. You can also get quilting thread. Now this quilting thread I use just on the top of I use the quilting thread to quilt my pieces together. So as you see, I have several of them here. This is what I quilt the pieces. It's a 50 weight 100% cotton. The polyester, which is the colored, and this is the invisible, and then the silky, those are used to do the quilting part on top that everybody can be seen. Start with white or a neutral color of 100% cotton at the 50 weight. Then you need some needles. I use Smith's needles. I normally use the universal, or I use the quilting needles, which I am all out of. The universal, I use a 70-10, that just makes a smaller hole, or the 80-11. And those are just the needles I normally use. I have other needles, so like if you're going to be sewing denim quilt, you'll obviously need jean needles. But to get started, I would go with the universal 70-10 or the quilting needles. Now we're going to mark on our fabric, and there's a huge array of marking utensils. You have pencils, chalk, friction pins, and water-soluble marking pins. My go-to is the friction. They come in a package, and you have white to black, and then some colors in between, so you're able to write on all kinds of colors of fabric. The nice thing with the friction pin is when you go in and iron, it like erases away off your fabric. Then we have the water soluble, which is, they're okay, but you have to you have to wash your fabric, or use a little rag in order to get them to come off your fabric. And that's what the pencils are. They're water fabric or soluble, and you can get them in white, a grayish color, black. So it's good to have a white and a darker color, so no matter what color of fabric. So now let's talk about batting. I use several different battings. My favorite and go-to batting is 100% cotton. I like to use this for warmth, so bigger quilts. I use these for mug rugs because it seems to be less lumpy. I also use this, I get the Wrap and Zap. It is 45 inches by a yard, so it's perfect for some of my wall hangings and smaller projects. Then there is polyester blend or polyester batting. These ones I get for the larger quilts, because most of the time when we use a quilt, we're using it in the summer and we're using it in the winter. So I use the low loft 100% polyester quilt batting, and I buy the ones that come in the bag, and I just measure it to fit the quilt size that I'm doing, and then I always use the extra for smaller projects. But you can see kind of how thin it is. And this is the low loft. Now they have high loft, which is a lot thicker. The problem with the higher loft or the extra high loft, it is hard to quilt. It will get stuck down in your needle plate. So these are great for people that just make the quilt and then they tie with the yarn. So I don't use this very often. This actually came with a couch I purchased, and I used it to make my new ironing board mat. You can always, like, recycle stuff that you get. Next thing that I recommend, which is not something you have to have right away because you can use the basting pins, but I like to use the 505 temporary spray. So what this does is it temporarily holds your fabric to your batting, or fabric to fabric if you're not putting batting in, so you're able to quilt your quilt together. You just spray it on, smooth it out, do your quilting or embroidery, applique, whatever you're choosing to do, and then once it's washed, it'll wash out. It does not gum up with the needle on your sewing machine, so it's a really good thing to use. There are several temporary adhesives out there, but like I said, I like to use the 505, and I just pick mine up at my local Hobby Lobby store. Then one of the most important items besides the sewing machine and fabric that you're going to need is an iron. You need to press your fabric for one, to get out the wrinkles, and then you're going to be pressing your seams. You don't have to have a very expensive iron, but there are a few things that I look for when I'm looking for a new iron. I like to have one that has the controls on the top for what setting to use. So I can see, I also look to see if they have a steam where that has the buttons that I can push the steam in the mister. And then the other thing I look for is to make sure it has an auto shut off on an iron. And then of course you're going to need your ironing board, and you want to make sure that it's big enough that you can be able to iron a good piece of fabric on it. And then I also like this wool pressing mat that I got. It's great for using on seams. Then of course you need your sewing machine, and you don't have to have one that has a bunch of whistles and all the gadgets. Just a simple sewing machine. I use Singer brand. The features that I look for in a sewing machine is one that has a large throat plate here, which is just from the needle to the tower. You want to make sure you have enough space that you can be able to push your quilt through when you're doing the quilting on the top. All it really needs to do is a straight stitch. Some sewing machines, like if you have an older one, it don't do the back stitch. So when I'm looking at sewing machines, I also make sure that I can be able to do back stitch. And then another feature that I like to look for is if the dog feeds are able to come down. And so I have a button back here that I can push, and it will make my dog feeds come down, so I have control over the fabric as I'm pushing it through the machine. And I use that for the free motion quilting. And then when you need them to come back up, you push it back over, and then they'll pop back up ready for you to start sewing. When you're doing free motion quilting, it is recommended that you have some quilting gloves. What you need to look for in a quilting glove is to make sure that the tips have some type of rubbery tip. This one's a full sheet of rubbering material. You can get some that have just little dots. And what it's for is when you're quilting, it's gripping onto your fabric, so you have more control and easier to move your fabric around instead of having to try to push and pull and everything else to get them to go. They just make it a lot easier to maneuver your fabric around as you're doing free motion quilting. These are fairly inexpensive. You can get as just a single pair of gloves. You can also buy them in a package. I've known some people that went and just found gardening gloves that have the same features. And lastly but not least, you're going to need a couple different feet. Your sewing machine will come with just a plain standard sewing foot, which will work just fine. You just have to know where your 1/4 inch is on your machine to make your 1/4 inch seams. But what I recommend is a 1/4 inch foot, and you can see the difference where this comes in. And so you can just guide your fabric along the edge of this foot here. That will give you your 1/4 inch seam allowance that we use in quilting. And then it also has a little notch in it, so when you're quilting and you're coming to a corner, you can be able to see, okay, now I'm a 1/4 inch from that corner to be able to pivot it and start going down the other side. So that's a nice feature to have, but I would really recommend getting a 1/4 inch foot. The other one you're going to need is what's called a darning foot or a free motion foot. It's just a circle. Sometimes it's a horseshoe, so the front part's open. That's what you use for your free motion quilting. So if you're going to do your own quilting and do free motion, I recommend getting a darning foot. So if you liked and got some knowledge out of this video, and quilting is something you would like to start, be sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell so you know the next time that I post a video in this series. Until then, happy quilting, and I'll see you in the next video.